Extraordinary is the title, and that's our theme song composed and performed by Nyasha Roden. Good morning, buenos dias, bonjour, kia ora, heart of love, e caro. Welcome to the Steelpanvibes. It's more the music radio show. I'm your host, Miss B, with Asa.
Yo, put down your drink, put down your coffee, put down anything that's in your hand that's not supposed to be the wheel. Drive safe. I'm going to be home soon, but everybody, please do your thing. Do it right. Have the positive vibes and good energy that really does exist, that knows that you can make somebody else laugh. For real, everybody do your good thing that exists here on earth. For real, have a good day, everyone.
All right. And in the studio with us is Nathaniel Brown. Good morning, Nate.
Good morning.
All right. Yeah, how cool that is. And Asa's friend Isaiah is here with us as well. Good morning, Isaiah.
Good morning, everybody.
All right. And you know the man who holds it down, Mr. Paul at the controls.
E. Carol.
All right. Greetings to all our listeners, especially those of you joining us for the first time. 60 minutes of the finest steel pan recordings and talk that inspires, informs, and empowers. Today, our music is an African vibration mix. We hope you enjoy. And in the spotlight, our always inspiring guest, Dwayne Akio Wong Omowali. He tackles intergenerational transmission of trauma. Sit back, relax, enjoy, and thanks for tuning in. Asa.
Amazing Grace is our opening selection performed by Robert Tobit from the album Gospel Melodies on Steel. Steelpanvibes radio show is brought to you by Thrifty Specialty Produce and Meats of Palm Bay. Thrifty Specialty Produce and Meats of Palm Bay offers a wide selection of fresh fruit, vegetables, fish, and meat for the international palate. Frozen foods, fresh dairy, and hot food at the deli are also available, as well as wholesale and catering services. And yes, we've got money transfer services to Haiti, Jamaica, and the Caribbean. Thrifty Specialty Produce of Palm Bay is located at 2135 Palm Bay Road. Call 321-726-8007. 321-726-8007. At Thrifty Specialty Produce and Meats, freshness is guaranteed. You are listening to the Steelpanvibes. It's more than music radio show on 1510 AM, WWBC 94.7, 99.9, 100.7 FM in Brevard County, plus streaming live online at facebook.com www.steelpanvibes and 1510 wwbc.com, available on app WWBC for Androids and iPhones. If you miss a show, no problem. Go to the videos tab on the Steelpan Vibes Facebook page and scroll to all videos. Thanks for joining us for our African Vibrations mix.
All right, folks. Well, Tellison, good morning. And Carol, thank you so much for joining us. I see Melville Dean. He's in Georgia. He's joined us as well. We really appreciate the time you take to tune in and get those positive vibes. And of course, Michael, he's in Delaware. He listens as well, and we appreciate that. You know, yesterday I attended the Melbourne Independent Film Festival. Yes, that was from Thursday the 17th to the 19th, and there was a special screening of the documentary From Steel Pan, the National Instrument, to Steel Pan, the Industry. And that documentary is about moving the steel pan into education and preparing young people for steel pan professions. In other words, they're just not learning to play the instrument, they're learning to manufacture the instrument so they can, you know, have jobs in that, build careers in that, whether you want to be a sinker, a blender, tuner, in Trinidad and Tobago. I thought it was a very impressive film, and I think it's going to get some awards. It was so good. Very, very well done. Okay, so let's get into it with the music of Jeff Narelle and a group of Malian musicians doing Blue Afrique from the album Sirocco.
Sopulo Jerry Salem Pullo Sopulo Jerry
Steelpanvibes radio show is sponsored by Tony's Cooling and Heating. Summer is over, and while fall and winter may be mild in Florida, it's still a good idea to get your cooling system inspected and serviced. Tony's Cooling and Heating is Palm Bay's premier air conditioning installation and repair company. It offers free estimates on various brands, residential or commercial. Give us a call at 321-863-2823. 321-863-2823, or visit tonyscooling.com. Let us improve your comfort level at home or office. Tony's Cooling and Heating, 321-863-2823. 863-2823, serving Melbourne and surrounding areas. And
watering baked goods, soups, beverages, and meals, from patties to rock cake, chicken to go head soup, juices to coconut water, and West Indian style meals, from jerk chicken to oxtail and delicious roti too, all at Brown's Bakery and Restaurant, located at 1155 Malabar Road inside the Interchange Plaza. Call 321-727-1060. 321-727-1060. Catering also available. Brown's Bakery and Restaurant. Taste you can't resist. More music from our African Vibrations mix, please, Maestro.
Okay, Paul is really getting into that. But I see, apart from Paul, Nyasha is getting into it, Cecil is getting into it, Russell is getting into it. Oh my goodness, we thank you all so much for joining us. Jacqueline is getting into it, and it's really something to get into. That was Strife in the Village, an Earl Rodney composition about rural Trinidad that takes us back to the Camberley riots of 1881. And it's on the critically acclaimed album Friends and Countrymen. Also, Rodney's alto or second pan was tuned by master tuner Alan Gervais. Alan Gervais. Oh my goodness, Paul really likes that one. Guess what? He's trying to put it in his pocket. Hey, sir.
Back to back coming up. Stay with us.
That set began with More Love, performed by the all-percussive group based in New York, Spirit Ensemble, featuring Melville Dean on steel pan, and it's from the album Ancestral Callings, followed by what we just heard, Right Day, performed by Miami-based Leon Foster Thomas from the album What You Don't Know. And I see Melville Dean is still there with us, and we got some new folks joining us. Let's see who just joined us. I think Paul just joined us. We so happy to have you. And of course, Russell from Sandy Grande, he's there with us as well. Oh, the Pan family is there. Trevor Cole is also with us. Now, I know you all know of Fela Ransom Kuti, brilliant and beloved Nigerian musician, an outspoken critic of corruption and oppression. His strident political and social activism brought him fame around the globe. His music was a mixture of Afrobeat, highlife, jazz, and funk. Here is New York-based Andre White paying tribute to Fela with a tune called Fela from the album Liberation Music. That was Andrew White doing his composition, Fela. You know, on the Steelpanvibes radio show, we love to bring young people into the studio. And we have 4 very bright and charming young men with us today. And I'm going to talk to both of them about a little bit about Pan. And then we were expecting to have a guest from Somalia. And Nathaniel was very much prepared to talk about Somalia, so he's going to share what he knows about Somalia with you. All right. Now, let me talk to Isaiah. Isaiah,
Yeah.
what's going on?
Oh, not much. Caribbean vibes here.
Yeah, Caribbean vibes. Okay, you were talking before and you said you wanted to learn to play the steel pan. What do you know about the steel pan? Where are you from, or where are your parents from?
Okay, from mom's side is from Tobago, and the father's side is from Jamaica.
Okay, all right. So tell us about your experience with the steel pan.
Well, every time I go down to Tobago, I just listen to the steel pan. I see it on TV, and sometimes even during like Carib Fest down there, they play. So, you know, my cousin John Arnold, he's involved with that too. Yes, from Signal Hill. Yeah.
But do you know how to play, or do you want to learn?
I want to learn how to play.
You want to learn.
Yes.
What do you think should happen then? In you live in Palm Bay, right?
Right.
So what do you think should happen so you could learn to play?
Well, either two options: going down to Tobago and learning how to play,
Oh,
or two, we could have our own little steel band practice. You know.
that sounds good.
Yes.
That sounds good. So in other words, we should have our own youth steel band in
Yes.
Palm Bay. That sounds
yes.
good. That sounds good. We're gonna work on that.
Oh yeah.
We're gonna work on that.
I'm
and
gonna hold
make
you to
that
your
up.
word on that.
I will, but we have to do things for ourselves as well. You
Right.
know? We can't wait for somebody to do it. We're gonna have to work. We're gonna have to be involved in getting our own steel band going.
Right.
Youth. All right. You hold me to that. I don't mind. I think Nathaniel will want to play in the steel band too. Would you?
Yes, I would.
You see how cool and quiet he is. You know, as I said before, we were working on what do you know about Somalia? Tell our listeners two things you learned about the place Somalia, where it is, and that kind of stuff.
I learned that Somalia is in East Africa, and the languages that they speak is Somali and Arabic.
All right. You have any idea of the population? What happens there? Anything happened there recently, or been happening there?
Wars have been happening there recently.
Wars.
Around 14 million people live there.
I see. Okay. All right. Well, we gotta keep our eyes on Somalia and what's going on there. Asa, what's going on, Asa? Asa, you look a little sad today. Tell our listeners what the story is. You lost a good friend, right?
My best friend is supposed to have gotten in a car accident. I was not in the vehicle with him, and I do know the location seems familiar. And I have seen a picture that represents his vehicle that is of many replicas in the United States or so. But yet, indeed, I still have the faith that it can be the miracle story of my distance from him proves his communication viable.
All right.
Coming up shortly in the Steelpanvibes Spotlight is our friend and regular guest, always thoughtful, always inspiring, Dwayne Akia Wang Amawale. In his discussion with Miss B, he tackles the subject of integrational transmission of trauma. That's the intergenerational transmission of trauma among African descendants. But first, let's listen to Professor Ron Reed with a traditional African chant, Sumumbari Ogun, from the album Precious Metals.
Oguaye baba yango miaoya Sumambari Oguaye baba yango miaoya Sumambari Oguaye baba yango miaoya Oguaye baba yango miaoya Oguaye baba yango miaoya Na Oguaye Na Oguaye Oguaye baba yango miaoya Oguaye baba yango miaoya Oguaye baba yango miaoya Oguaye ogua ye baba yango mia uya.
Sumambari sumambari ogu.
Na na na, ogua ye.
Na na na, sumambari ogu.
Na na na, ogua ye.
Na na na, sumambari ogu.
All right, folks, you know that song tells us we're in the Steelpanvibes Spotlight, and our regular monthly guest is Dwayne Akio Wong Omawali. He's a law student, a writer, and a Pan-Africanist. Welcome to the Steelpanvibes Spotlight again. Good to have you.
Yeah, it's always great being here.
Wonderful. And we're going to tackle a subject. We are going to talk about intergenerational transmission of trauma. Intergenerational transmission of trauma. Well, intergeneration, going from generation to generation, transmission, moving from one place to the next, and trauma. Not a pleasant thing. But we're going to tackle it, especially as it impacts African descendants. So, it's an important topic. Would you agree?
Very important.
All right. And it's going to help us better understand who we are based on psychological and emotional experiences of our ancestors as well as ourselves, and tools that can get us beyond the pain. Sometimes we're in pain and we even know we're in pain. Really. We think it's normal. No, it's not normal and it's not natural. So, Dwayne, intergenerational transmission of trauma is described as a theory which states that trauma can be transferred from one generation trauma survivors to further generations of survivors by way of complex post-traumatic stress disorder mechanisms. How do you interpret this experience or this explanation?
Well, my interpretation is, and especially as it relates to African people, what happens very often is people who undergo extremely traumatic or stressful situations, they tend to it stays with you either consciously or in many cases subconsciously. And what happens when it's subconscious is many times parents will actually pass on these stress and traumatic experiences to their children. And if it's subconscious, you're not even realizing you're doing it, but it's being done. And as it relates to African people, we've been, traumatized collectively as an entire group of people. So not only do we have individual cases where a parent might pass it on to a child, but you'd have situations where an entire community or even a nation will be passing on this trauma to the next, generation. And because so much of it is subconscious, we don't even realize the trauma is there or that we are passing on these traumas.
Mm-hmm. Although this area of psychiatry is young and controversial, Jewish scholars have studied the impact of the Holocaust on second and third generation Jews and found that, like as you said, intergenerational trauma is unconsciously, unwittingly transferred across generations. And much has been written about children and grandchildren of Holocaust survivors who have suffered psychological after effects in response to their ancestors' horrific trauma, end quote. Now, Dwayne, to your knowledge, has the impact of the enslavement of Africans and their descendants been studied by scholars?
Yes, yeah, very much so. I mean, I know there's many African-centered scholars such as Francis Cress Welsing, who passed a few years ago, Joy DeGruy, Amos Wilson, and even in from the Caribbean you had people like Frantz Fanon. So globally among African scholars, not just in the United States, but as I said, globally, this is a field that has been studied. And you mentioned that it's relatively new, but in terms of African people, we haven't necessarily been studying it from the aspect of psychology or psychiatry, but it is something that we've been aware of for many generations. And I'll mention Martin Delaney, who was an abolitionist in the 1800s, and even he mentioned that as a result of slavery and oppression, he described African Americans as being a broken people. So even before we had scholars who were studying this from a more scientific standpoint, African people always recognized that the situations that we've encountered and the depression that we've undergone have altered us as a people, and in many cases left us, as Delaney described us, as being a broken people.
But how we don't discuss that? We don't have those discussions. I mean, except in academic circles. Yeah. I mean, it's not something we talk about.
It's very painful, and it's difficult for us to talk about. And as I said, a lot of it is subconscious, so we don't even realize that the issue is there. So on one level, there's the fact that many of us aren't aware of it, and on the other aspect of it is just it's very painful to talk about. And you mentioned Jewish scholars, and most of the Jewish people that I've met, I mean, it's painful, but it's history that they're willing to talk about and discuss. And most of the Jewish people I've met don't run away from the Holocaust, but as a people, we tend to want to distance ourselves from the history and not talk about it.
Okay, before we talk about some of the findings of those researchers like Francis Cress Welding and Joy DeGruy and the other folks that you mentioned, we want to share some of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, which is described as a mental health disorder triggered by a terrifying event. For example, when you experience, learn about, or witness events like war, a fire, sexual abuse, or other terrifying events, you may end up suffering with things like, or from things like nightmares, severe anxiety attacks, depression, violent outbursts, insomnia, etc. Do African Americans or Africans in the diaspora, do they display these symptoms in alarming numbers, or is it something that just happens occasionally?
I think it would depend on the location. Obviously, poorer locations where people have less access to resources and crime is a more serious issue. You see these issues more frequently, but I think across the board, most people of African descent at some point in their life would have experienced some of these symptoms, because racial oppression is so pervasive among African people, and we deal with this in nearly every aspect of our lives, that it's very difficult to completely escape any of these symptoms, really.
Talk to us about some of those findings from those scholars. Talk to us about that.
Well,
with regard to, post-traumatic stress disorder and the slave experience.
I mean, what's interesting with the findings, they're very consistent in terms of showing that not only have African people undergone centuries of oppression, but the impact of the oppression and what it's done to us. I mentioned Joy DeGruy. She writes about what she calls the post-traumatic slave syndrome, which is similar to the post-traumatic stress disorder. And what that is, essentially, is that we've been enslaved and oppressed for so long that a lot of what happened to us during that oppression gets passed on through the generation. So, for example, one of the things that was done to African people is that the slave masters stripped us of our culture, of our history, robbed us of our very identity, and then made us feel ashamed of our identity. So things that are African, we tend not to like things that are African. Our complexion, many of us still bleach to try to lighten our complexion. So and you see this across the board. I mean, I know I would encounter people who would they would refuse to wear African clothing because they don't want to look African. And my response to that is, you're an African person, you can't avoid. I mean, no matter what you're wearing, you're always going to look like an African. But just that association and identification with Africa, they don't want to deal with. So all of the psychologists that I mentioned, that's primarily what they were studying, not only the oppression that African people endured, but what is the impact that it's had on how we perceive ourselves as African people. And probably the most famous study that was done on this was Kenneth Clark's doll test study. And for those who aren't familiar, what he did was he put two dolls, a black doll and a white doll, in front of a black child, and then the child would be asked which doll looks better, and most of those children pointed to the white doll. And what was particularly alarming about the study is that every time the study's been reproduced since then in the following decades, the results have essentially been the same. Black children still prefer white dolls. Sometimes the question is posed to the child to be which doll is the pretty doll, which one's the ugly doll. The black doll would be the ugly doll. And so he conducted this experiment in the United States, and I remember in the 1980s, I believe, the government of Trinidad and Tobago actually conducted the same study, and they were alarmed to find the same results in Trinidad, and they were baffled because the mentality was, well, yeah, the United States had a history of segregation and Jim Crow and that type of racial oppression, but the government of Trinidad was thinking, well, the population there didn't undergo the same type of racial oppression. So I remember the government was really alarmed when the studies came back with the same results.
Well, the conditioning and the miseducation is the same wherever it is.
Yes, it's global.
So whether it's subliminal or whatever, you don't know who you are as a person of African descent. I mean, you don't have a language. You've been taught that it's not good. It's you're ugly or whatever, and it's pervasive. So it's going on from generation to generation. These bad feelings about being African, not knowing your history or anything like that, and being taught that this is better. Somebody who's lighter is better. Somebody who's straight hair is better. And I mean, do you have a choice? You've been brainwashed. In other words, you've been whitewashed. And it still exists. It does still exist. So we just want to be encouraging parents and so on to, build up your children, teach your children who they are and to take pride in who they are and, to love who they are. I mean, that's how God made them. He didn't make a mistake. So we need to be more, aware and embracing our beautiful history and our beautiful skin and our beautiful hair. Listen, Dwayne, you stay right there. This is very important. But, we can't have a show unless we have a word from one of our sponsors. ASAP.
The Steelpanvibes radio show is brought to you by All American Solid Surface Inc. Looking for flooring, tile, laminate, vinyl, or carpet, All American Solid Surface can do the job. For all wood cabinets, kitchen and bath countertops with free sink. Yes, a free sink with purchase of a countertop in granite, quartz, and solid surfaces. Call Cedric Webley at All American Solid Surface Inc. 321-473-8934 or 321-508-1013. That's 321-473-8934 or 321-508-1013. Or check out our website at allamericansolidsurface.com. And if you are in Brevard County, visit our showroom at 6963 Old Nassau Boulevard, Unit 101 in Melbourne. All American Solid Surface Inc. Upgrading your home and business interiors beyond expectations.
Okay, folks, we are in the Steelpanvibes Spotlight. If you're just joining us, and our guest is Dwayne Akiowang Omowale. He's a regular guest. He comes in once a month. He's also a law student, a writer. He's written 7 books, and he is not 7 books, 17 books. And he is also a Pan-Africanist. And it's good that we have young people who are concerned about the welfare and well-being of their community. That's very good. More of us need to be like that. Young and involved, young and committed, young and wanting to know and learn more about your history and your culture and embracing the same. because, maybe a lot of problems and situations young people and some old people find themselves involved in is because of that lack of knowledge, that lack of love, that, it's just a lack. So let's just spread more love and appreciation, because we are wonderful people. We come from great roots. I mean, resistance to all kinds of oppression. That's where we come from, and we build on that, and others lay the road before us, and we supposed to follow, and, don't let me get on the soapbox here. But I really appreciate having young people involved and, leading the charge for our people. All right, so let's continue. We're talking about intergenerational transmission of trauma. Yes, folks, it's real. It's nothing, we need to be ashamed of. We just need to deal with it. So, Dwayne, often social messages and stereotypes suggest the following. These are just some of the things they suggest. We get over it. Get over it. What is this? I wasn't involved in any slave trade or anything. Just get over it. Or get off welfare. Or stop dressing like thugs. Tell me, are Africans in the USA and in the diaspora aware of these mental conditions, these PTSDs and, the things that we suffer? That, I don't know, maybe we're not aware of it. And if we are not aware of it, how do we address it? Do we have mental health professionals who could help us treat these conditions?
Yeah, most of us aren't aware of it. And in terms of professionals, before I mentioned some professionals that did deal with these issues and studied it, but in terms of overall the mental health we have in the United States really isn't even geared towards the particular problems that we face as African people. And I mentioned Naeem Akbar among the professionals earlier. He actually, in one of his books, he wrote a separate category of mental disorder and diagnosis, particularly for African people, because what he was pointing out is the current model of psychology that we have is based on European people. It's not really based on the particular historical and cultural experiences of African people, and that's important because we endure particular challenges that are unique to us as a people. And even culturally, Akbar was pointing out there's a lot of things that are well established in African culture that people looking on from the outside who aren't really familiar with our culture wouldn't be able to recognize. So he felt it was very important for us to develop an African-centered approach to psychology, and it's still not a widespread approach. So very often what you have is people will tell us to get over it and forget about the past because they don't really understand what was done to African people and how, even though slavery ended long ago, a lot of the mentalities and the behaviors that were instilled in our ancestors through that trauma are passed on. And we spoke earlier about the hatred of our African roots, of our African appearance. That's something that was beaten into our ancestors during slavery that's still with us. So it's not just a matter of just getting over it and forgetting about it like it never happened.
So in other words, today we are still experiencing the legacy of slavery.
Yes.
In terms of our mental health.
Yes.
The conditioning that we've had to hate yourself. Yeah. We're still dealing with those traumas.
And I mean, and to show how it's impacted every aspect of our lives, the reason why we're having this conversation right now in English is because that's the language that was forced on our ancestors. So nowhere can we go as African people to escape this legacy. It's with us in every aspect of our life, even right down to the languages that we're speaking.
Okay, the time is running out. So I have two quick questions for you. Coping mechanisms. You say they're not available, or we develop our own. For example. Okay, go ahead.
Well, what I was saying is they're not as widely available as they should be. But the thing about African people and why studying our history is so important, we're actually we've been very effective at creating these coping mechanisms. The best example I could think of is music. We've created entire genres of music, like blues in the United States, clips on the Caribbean. Now, the roots of these art forms were what our ancestors used to cope with the oppression. So we've been very effective at that, and I think any type of effective coping or therapy to deal with these issues has to first look at what have we produced from our own culture to deal with this, and how can we take these things and then use it to make it more effective.
Absolutely. And I was reading this young lady, she's a psychiatrist, an African American. She was talking about the use of comedy and things like that.
That's another thing that we've done as a people. We use comedy.
To ease the pain. To ease the pain. Well, maybe we have some young psychiatrists who would use the right models coming up to address some of the issues that we face. How about the music? You mentioned the music. You think the steel pan have those therapeutic values?
Yes, definitely. I remember last month when I was on the show and we were speaking about steel pan, one of the things I said is the instrument itself is very relaxing. So I think there's a lot of therapeutic value in just listening to the steel pan, but also playing it as well. And one of the things that I wanted to mention was J.D. Elder, who was a historian from Tobago. What he used to do was he used to take violent gang members, and he used to teach them to play steel band. So suddenly these violent gangs went from being violent gangs to steel band orchestras. So he demonstrated that you could actually use the steel pan to channel certain self-destructive behaviors among the African youth and use it towards things like the steel
Absolutely.
pan.
And if you look into the history of the steel pan, as you mentioned, it came from young men of African descent who were in gangs or getting into trouble and so on, and they used that to compete, the music that they made and the instruments that they made. So it was all involved, and to take them away
from the violence.
from the violence into more creative aspects.
So in terms of helping to really address this issue and providing treatment and a therapeutic treatment for people that are ongoing this traumas, that's a perfect example of using the culture to help heal us as a people.
Wonderful. Well, as always, it's a pleasure having you and having you explore different ideas, things that people either don't take for granted, are in denial of, or just don't want to address. We take up the challenge and we bring it forward. Thank you so much, Dwayne. Looking forward to see. By the way, how is law school?
It's great. Really enjoying law school.
Wonderful. Well, we see you soon again.
All right.
Okay, folks, so what's the last word? I quote, "Every great dream begins with a dreamer." Always remember, you have within you the strength, the patience, and the passion to reach for the stars to change the world. End quote. Harriet Tubman. Asa.
Taking us home, Ralph Robertson on keys, with vocal arrangement by Carl Jacob Dewing and Andre Tenka composition. Forward home from the album Majesty.
Until next time, take very good care of yourself and keep the master in mind as we go through the storms of life. May God bless you all.